I've often referred to the glory years of the 1980s as an absolute peak for various toy properties. While we have seen both ups and downs across the multiple brands we collected in our childhood, it's always worth visiting particular years in a stroll down memory lane and relive some of the best times in the action figure industry. In this case, the year of 1987. When looking at the pop culture industry as a whole, one could talk about the timeless movies that were released and others that are perpetually rewatchable through to modern times. The popular music genre continued to flourish with what would become classic, continual airplay hits, and our growing television options would see the rise of new shows as well as the ongoing peak runs of both sitcoms and primetime drama. Like most of the years during this decade, our toy aisles left us blissfully inundated with options, and choosing our toys wisely was something that each child had to learn, since taking the entire toy aisle home with us was clearly not an option, at least not for most of us. Now, to hone in on the big three of the 1980s, Masters of the Universe admittedly saw a notable decline in sales even if they did release a live-action movie in 1987. G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero would see the production of a movie as well, albeit in animated form, in this same year. Also, G.I. Joe's toy sales were clearly enough to sustain the franchise for several more years after this, even if it took a break from our television screens before Deke took over with a follow-up animated series by 1989.
As for the Transformers, the year 1987 would see an abbreviated, shortened season on American TV, serving as its domestic swan song. However, overseas the series would carry on like the previous cartoon seasons, albeit with a dramatic shift away from our cast of regulars such as Optimus Prime, Megatron, as well as the Cars, Seeker Jets, and animated movie characters that were dominant in the prior years.
In their place would be the gimmick-themed Headmasters and Targetmasters, among others, representing a new cast that would occupy our screen time in the post-1986 Transformers movie era. And while television airing and episode options varied depending on where you lived, the toys still flooded the aisles of your favorite stores, and depending on your preferences, it is arguable that this year of Transformers was as epic as the previous ones that introduced us to these heroic Autobots and evil Decepticons in the first place. As such, this here is the story of that revised cast of characters: the Headmasters, Targetmasters, Clones, Combiners, and overseas exclusives, the Transformers in the year of 1987. It's obvious that the transition between the 1985 Earth-based Transformers cast and the more futuristic 1986 movie-era figures was a more gut-punching overturn of the core cast, at least by comparison to the more gradual transition of the 1987 Masters era, though the prior year's core cast still served in supporting roles on screen. However, thematically and selection-wise, I found that 1987 was the first year that the toy aisle switched the focus to these gimmick-driven releases rather than any incarnation of a Matrix-bearing Prime and ruthless tyrant of a villainous leader, be it Megatron or Galvatron. As such, when I look at the ensemble main cast of Autobot Headmasters, namely Highbrow, Brainstorm, Chrome Dome, and Hardhead, my immediate thought is noting the equality and parity among this cast rather than having a single standout character to lead the charge. As a child in kindergarten, I was fortunate enough to own all four of these back in the day, though the Hardhead figure is the only one that I've had to survive with me through to adulthood.
The attraction factor of these toys is clearly the two-in-one character nature, where the head could separate from the body to give us a separate, smaller Transformer, and thus more playtime creativity in our living room and backyard or school ground adventures. Assuming, of course, you didn't lose the head.
I'll point out that the American cartoon release explained these transforming suit headmasters as humanoid-like beings known as Nebulons from the planet Nebulos, who were locked in their own perpetual battle with one another before their interactions with the Transformers. During the short-lived 3-part Rebirth series, which would comprise the entirety of the abbreviated 4th Transformers season in the United States, these head-forming characters were to be outfitted with these stylized exosuits to aid their Transformer partners on the battlefield. Either way, the heads ultimately can transform into drivers or pilots, with the main body Transformer in its alt mode. I'll point out that in the fully developed 35-episode Japanese animated Headmasters series, the continuity takes a divergent path from what we saw domestically. Specifically, there are no Nebulons nor the existence of the planet Nebulos. Instead, the transforming heads are characterized as Cybertronians who fled the planet long ago over to the planet Master and eventually learned their head transformation process along the way. They would later bond and attach themselves to the larger Transector-type bodies. The key difference here is that the American continuity shows the character's head as a distinct and different being and personality from its body, with one Nebulan and one Cybertronian, whereas in the Japanese continuity, the character is shown as one individual with the head that can separate from the body. Now, regarding the main quartet of Autobot Headmasters, it seems that there wasn't a clear leader in the American timeline, but the Nebulon Gort was clearly the leading voice of his Resistance faction, and was bonded to Highbrow, so there's that. However, in the Japanese continuity, Chrome Dome introduces himself as the leader of this foursome, even if he answers to other higher-ranking Autobots throughout the series. Note that Brainstorm has a faceplate type appearance in both toy and animated form in the American continuity, but his Japanese animation doesn't include the faceplates. I'll also mention that RC was among the main cast of Autobot Headmasters in the American cartoon, bonded to Daniel Witwicky as her headmaster, albeit this was not the case in Japan, nor did she have a toy in any vintage release, though her character has turned up in toy form during more recent times.
The opposing Decepticon trio consisted of Weirdwolf, Mindwipe, and Skullcruncher. And of course, they transformed into creatures rather than vehicle modes to oppose the Autobots. This trio is often seen flanked by another pair of Headmasters, namely the Horicons in 8-Base and Snapdragon, who were unique in that they were also triple changes.
As for the colossal battle station sized characters, we need to introduce the largest G1 Transformer made in this video series at some point, so naturally here's Fortress Maximus, who was released in this year, standing around 22 inches tall in height, being a triple changer, and with incredible box art. This toy was a product of its time when we could get a vast array of playset sized toys across multiple toy properties. I've often just defaulted to following the North American 3-part Rebirth Season 4 continuity, so I just generally call Fort Max's head as Cerebros and Cerebros' head as Spike, though the Japanese continuity refers to the combined head mode character simply as Fortress and the larger combined mode as the aptly named Fortress Maximus. Either way, it was an impressive figure even when I saw it at a friend's house during the 1980s, and he's equally as impressive now in adulthood. And if you do happen to own the Japanese version of him, he comes with the ultra cool Master Sword for his large combined mode and a smaller sword for his Headmaster. And speaking of impressive, while not quite as large in toy form, here is the Decepticon's large battle station, Scorponok. I know it's not ideal that Fortress Maximus was quite a bit larger than Scorponok's toy, even if the cartoon counterparts were supposed to be equal in size. I do think though that Scorponok looks great when displayed with other large Decepticons, such as Trypticon. And what's also cool about these Headmasters overall is that when you stick the head into the neck slot, you can see the character's vitals when you open the chest plate, namely their speed, intelligence, and strength.
Of course, the Masters era of Transformers didn't solely consist of Headmasters, but the Targetmasters were just as important, seeing as their 2-in-1 gimmick was an interesting spin on the Masters technology. What I mean is that the weapons were a Transformer, and the main figure body was also a Transformer. The North American Rebirth portrays the weapons as Nebulons, in exosuits, bonded to existing Autobots and Decepticons, whereas the Japanese Headmasters series portrays the weapons as Cybertronians from the planet Master, who bond themselves to Transformers.
Compared to the Headmaster robots of the Japanese continuity, the Targetmasters maintain two distinct personalities between the weapon and main robot, as opposed to being a single character that separates into two forms. The Autobot newcomers consisted of Point Blank, Sure Shot, and Crosshairs, joined by veterans Cup and Blur, as well as Hot Rod, who clearly needed something new after giving the Matrix back to Optimus Prime.
The Decepticons consisted of the newly introduced Slug Slinger, Trigger Happy, and Misfire, to go along with the established pair of Scourge and Cyclonus. Note that the Decepticon Targetmasters have gone up in both price and desirability in recent years, so be sure to shop wisely when hunting to add them into your collection.
One manufacturing difference in the molding between the American and Japanese releases is that the Japanese released Targetmasters do not contain an indentation molded into the figure for the rub signs, and as such, the molded in spot where the rub signs would otherwise be placed is just a smooth surface. On the other hand, the American release does have an indented spot molded in for them. Just an interesting side note. Initially exclusive to Japan, Stepper and Artfire were added to the Autobot Targetmaster lineup, albeit they did not appear in either of the North American nor Japanese cartoons. Serving as recolors of Jazz and Inferno, they are hard to find and desirable for hardcore collectors, though do note that Stepper was reissued during the 2000s. 1987 would be the first year that the Transformers would officially do away with their ever so beloved mini-bots. In their place would be the 6 Throttlebots, who were basically wind-up toys, but unique enough in name and color scheme to fit seamlessly into the Autobot lineup. Meet Freeway, Searchlight, Rollbar, Wideload, Chase, and a reformatted Bumblebee, now reconstructed as Goldbug. Also, the gimmicky nature of 1987 wasn't limited to just new Masters-themed toys and Throttlebots. Both the Autobots and Decepticons would issue a set of clones, namely Fastlane and Cloudraker on the good guys' side, then Pounce and Wingspan to support the villains. While the robot modes were virtually identical as a pair, their alternate modes were unique from one another to add to the levels of imaginative play on your fictional battlefields as a child. And because things seemed to go well in pairs during this particular release year, here's the dual cons of Battletrap and Flywheels. Two Decepticons who could actually split into separate halves in their smaller alt modes, and as such, Battletrap and Flywheels could split themselves into a flight mode as well as a land-based vehicle each. On the subject of innovative pairings, the two-in-one nature of the Transformers made its way into other forms in this particular year, namely the Autobot Spy known as Punch, who could also transform into a Decepticon as Counterpunch. I do display both of his weapons on him regardless of which mode he is displayed, even if I'm aware that one gun is meant for his punch mode and the other for his counterpunch mode. Inexplicably though, his vehicle form seems to be universal to both factions. Now, since various sub-factions and groupings were clearly what drove the Transformers 1987 year in terms of what it's remembered for, we need to talk about the Monsterbots, namely Grotesque, Repugnus, and Double Cross. While they didn't appear in the North American cartoon, they did have a brief appearance in the Japanese series. They're a little underserved in animated form, but they do make for fierce, imposing toys on your shelf, and even came with a cool spark action, assuming of course that yours still works. The Combiners were also not without representation in this year. While Computron and Abominus did make appearances during the third season of the Transformers cartoon of 1986, their toys were only made available as part of the 1987 set of offerings. What's great here is that we see the obvious foil between the intelligence-driven Technobots who form Computron and the more vicious, animalistic combiner form of the Terrorcons known as Abominus. Of course, Computron was introduced by way of Grimlock's creation in the prior season, as a new combiner was needed to do battle with Abominus. For that reason, these two are forever locked in battle in my mind's eye. In Japan, we would also get the addition of the now hard-to-find Trainbots Combiner set, who assembled to form the merged robot called Raiden. This was cool to see as it was many years earlier and a long gap before seeing this toy again. given that it originally started in the Diaclone line that predated the Transformers some years earlier, and we finally got a canon storyline introduction of him in the Japanese animated series. Since the Decepticons always seemed to have more combiners than the Autobots, it was great to add Raiden to the ranks of the good guys to help even out the odds on that front.
Then, of course, is the ultra-complex Transformer, the Hexachanger and Decepticon Ninja Officer, known as Sixshot. 6 modes, deadly as ever, and a great toy overall. His American Rebirth 3-parter appearance was limited to him demonstrating all 6 modes as he quickly took down the aerial bots single-handedly. However, in the Japanese timeline, he's one of the most prominent Decepticons.
What he'll forever be known for overseas, though, is his epic one-on-one encounter with Ultra Magnus, where he used his ninja prowess, all 6 modes, and even a hybrid Wingwolf 7th mode to eventually defeat and kill Ultra Magnus, thus dealing a massive blow to the Autobot ranks. This was quite morbid for a kid's cartoon, but cemented the legacy and evil nature of Sixshot. As the Japanese Headmasters cartoon wore on, he eventually developed something of a rivalry with the Autobot Headmaster Chrome Dome, as well as something of an unlikely friendship with the human Daniel Witwicky. The year 1987 would also introduce us to 2 new Decepticon cassettes, namely Slugfest and Overkill, further adding to Soundwave's tape army. Now, due to the more hard-nosed, riskier nature of the Japanese cartoon, we did see another epic duel, one being that of Soundwave and Blaster's eventual fight to the death. This actually occurred in the opening episodes, and we watch both combatants fight until Soundwave explodes and Blaster falls to his death from injuries, leaving both factions mourning after the fact. Interestingly though, both would get resurrected and reformatted. Soundwave would eventually become Soundblaster, and Blaster would become known as Twincast. Both toys were initially sold only in Japan during 1987, but both toys would see reissues in the 2000s, which are the ones that I happen to own. Rounding out the year of 1987 would be more Japan-only releases, namely the Dino cassettes as well as individual Headmasters, figures that I have far less familiarity with compared to other characters stated in this video. Most of these Japanese exclusive Headmaster heads did appear briefly in the Japanese cartoon, albeit in a different color during animation compared to their toys. The Dino cassettes themselves were never in the cartoon. Note that the 1987 release figures in Japan also included a cool bio card with their box in addition to the standard tech specs on the boxes themselves. Also, since Battle Beasts were released in the United States and still has a niche market among collectors right now, I'll make mention that the Battle Beasts were released under the Transformers sub-branding of Beastformers in Japan concurrently in 1987 with the Headmasters series. Either way, what you'll have seen here and experienced is my assemblance of the Transformers cast in 1987, not just in the domestic releases, but also with the overseas figures that added to the already extended and large cast of characters. The cartoon references were sprinkled in where I felt a key storyline occurred, and the end goal was to make this a meaningful video content guide for you as followers of the channel to enjoy and refer back to if need be. You'll notice that the cast of characters here is quite vast, and when you include the Japanese exclusive releases, the potential collection of toys in this 1987 year is more or less double of that compared to 1984's opening year lineup of 18 Autobots and 10 Decepticons. And if you do happen to have some free time, do check out the History of Transformers 1984 video that I did some time ago. 1987 was an interesting year overall, what with the fading of the big 3 80s boys toy line properties from television screens, and a transition year before Turtle Power would take over where the big 3 left off on our weekly episode watch list. Though, as shown here, the Transformers didn't go quietly from the toy aisle nor on television screens in international markets. For that reason, and with the subjective popularity and timeless nature of this 1987 cast, we still see both official modern as well as third-party releases of this Headmaster-led series of characters to this day. I was pretty young when these toys came out, but for me, 1987 represents one of the best years of my childhood and one of my formative years growing up around these amazing toy properties. But if you had tapped out of Transformers already by this point in time, or are just going back now to visit this particular year, hopefully this video can serve as an informative guide for you. Or if you're already familiar with this particular year and time period of Transformers history, then hopefully I've done justice to the amazing Transformers property that's already entrenched in your memories. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters and channel members whose names can be found in the description section of this video. Visit patreon.com/toyconnections if you're interested in becoming a patron yourself to receive exclusive content and behind the scenes updates, or click the join button next to my channel name to receive special emojis and badges next to your name in the comments section of any Toy Connections video or live stream. Also, thanks to my co-presenter Phil from Treasures for Trigger for lending his time and efforts into the production of this video. You can find his channel link in the description below as well. That takes us to the end of this history video. If you enjoyed it, please click on some of my other content here. Subscribe if you already haven't, press that like button to spread this video to more viewers, and share it with your friends. Otherwise, let's transform and roll out into the next video. Thanks again, and take care.